The American security apparatus is fracturing from the inside, and Washington is letting it burn. At major airports, medical personnel are pulling passengers out of 4.5-hour security lines. But the chaos at the terminal is only a fraction of the crisis. Off the coast, the United States Coast Guard is conducting maritime rescues without pay. On the midterm campaign trail, the Secret Service is taking bullets for politicians who refuse to fund their paychecks. Over 100,000 federal defenders have been completely abandoned. This is not a logistical failure. This is a deliberate political siege. And the collateral damage is the American public. This is Lawrence reporting. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We are now 41 days into the targeted shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security. To understand how a massive federal agency simply runs out of money, you have to understand how the machine works. The United States government operates on a 12-month fiscal year. Congress is legally required to pass 12 separate appropriation bills to fund different sectors of the government. When they fail, they pass temporary patches known as continuing resolutions. Last fall, that machine completely broke down. Congress failed to pass the full budget, triggering a record-breaking 43-day shutdown of the entire federal government. Lawmakers desperately relied on temporary patches to get the government limping into the new year. By the end of January, they agreed on full-year funding for almost every other federal agency. But they deliberately left the DHS behind. And on February 14th, that final patch expired. The money stopped completely. The reason the DHS is uniquely vulnerable is its sheer scale. Created in the aftermath of September 11th, 2001, it is a massive umbrella department that integrated 22 different federal agencies into one unified command structure. At the center of the political gridlock are the big three: Customs and Border Protection, the frontline operators responsible for securing the physical borders, operating ports of entry, and regulating international trade. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the interior operators handling cross-border criminal investigations and enforcing immigration laws, including deportation operations. And the Transportation Security Administration, the aviation protectors created explicitly after 9/11 to secure the nation's commercial airports, who are currently the immediate collateral damage of this crisis. But when the funding stops, the broader security network is starved right alongside them. The United States Coast Guard, a unique branch of the military that resides under the DHS during peacetime, is forced to handle maritime law enforcement and search and rescue operations entirely unpaid. The Secret Service, the VIP protectors famous for guarding politicians, is simultaneously tasked with safeguarding the U.S. financial infrastructure and payment systems without a paycheck. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, the disaster responders coordinating the federal role in preparing for and recovering from domestic disasters like hurricanes and wildfires, is watching its relief fund dangerously deplete. CISA, the digital defenders tasked with protecting the government's networks and critical physical infrastructure like power grids and water plants from foreign cyber threats, is operating with a severely crippled staff. And U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the administrative branch processing lawful immigration, asylum claims, and citizenship naturalization, is entirely paralyzed. And the bleeding does not stop at the federal level. It is actively infecting the American economy. With Customs and Border Protection operating on a skeleton crew, the delays at land ports of entry are paralyzing international freight. Commercial trucking lines carrying auto manufacturing parts and agricultural imports are stalled at the border for days. The economic contagion is spreading from the checkpoints directly to the grocery store aisles and assembly lines, threatening to trigger a massive domestic inflation spike. Inside the airports, the chaos is metastasizing into a terrifying physical threat. With the TSA operating at 50% capacity, the White House issued a highly controversial executive order, cross-deploying armed ICE agents directly into the terminal checkpoints to support the strained hubs. But this is where the political siege becomes truly dystopian. The ultimate irony of this crisis is playing out in real time. The very agency at the dead center of the political war, the exact department whose actions triggered the funding blockade, is entirely immune to the financial fallout. Because of administrative loopholes and the weaponization of multi-year funds, those ICE agents are fully paid. The administration has legally maneuvered to protect their favored enforcement agency. The instigators are cashing full paychecks, while the aviation protectors standing right next to them are forced to work 14-hour mandatory shifts for free. Security analysts are now sounding the alarm over fatigue-induced security breaches. When the men and women screening luggage for explosives and firearms are operating on zero sleep and facing imminent eviction, the mathematical probability of a catastrophic failure skyrockets. The reason this massive security umbrella was pushed off the cliff is a straightforward, brutal partisan war. The catalyst occurred on January 24th. During a federal immigration operation in Minneapolis, 2 Customs and Border Protection agents shot and killed a 37-year-old intensive care nurse named Alex Pretty. Bystander video revealed Pretty was unarmed at the moment he was shot 10 times. In response, Senate Democrats spearheaded a ruthless funding blockade. They flatly refused to fund the DHS until 3 strict operational guardrails are signed into law. To understand the severity of this standoff, we have to look at the exact anatomy of the debate. The first demand is mandatory body cameras for all enforcement agents. Democrats argue this is the only way to establish unbiased, objective truth during violent encounters, pointing out that without bystander video, the truth about Alex Pretty would have been buried. The GOP initially fought this, citing the massive logistical costs of data storage and the risk of exposing confidential tactical methods. But Democrats countered that the cost of human life outweighs server space, and that transparency ultimately protects good agents from false accusations. After weeks of gridlock, the GOP finally conceded this point. The second demand is visible identification for all federal agents. Democrats want to end the era of anonymous forces snatching people off the streets, arguing that civilians have a fundamental right to know who is detaining them. The GOP fiercely opposed this on the grounds of officer safety. They argue that forcing agents to wear full name tags allows cartels and extremists to easily identify, dox, and harass agents and their families at their private homes. The Democratic response was blistering, pointing out that local police officers wear name tags every single day without suffering mass casualties. Eventually, the GOP offered a partial concession. They proposed a bill requiring visible identification, but explicitly allowed agents to use alphanumeric tactical codes or badge numbers instead of their actual names. Democrats immediately rejected the proposal, arguing that a terrified civilian being pepper sprayed cannot memorize a random 6-digit code on a moving tactical vest. They called the proposal a calculated shield for brutality. This specific point remains trapped in active negotiations. But the third demand is the absolute red line: a total ban on raids near sensitive locations like schools and churches. Democrats argue that executing armed federal warrants in the parking lot of an elementary school or the steps of a parish inherently endangers the most vulnerable members of society. They argue the collateral trauma is unacceptable, and that no arrest is worth a stray bullet hitting a child. The GOP completely rejects this. Their law enforcement analysts argue that a total geographic ban creates operational safe havens. They argue that if you explicitly write into law that federal agents cannot enter a certain radius, violent fugitives and human smuggling rings will intentionally use schools and hospitals as human shields. This third pillar is the deadlock. It is the main reason the standoff continues. The terrifying reality is that Washington knows exactly how this ends. During the record-breaking 43-day shutdown in 2018 and 2019, the sheer financial trauma caused thousands of federal workers to resign. Many never returned. That attrition permanently crippled the experience levels across multiple national security agencies. The current crisis is actively repeating that exact historical precedent, hollowing out the Homeland Security apparatus for a generation. But how does the government force its own people to work without a paycheck? The answer lies in a brutal legal trap. When funding expires, the Anti-Deficiency Act makes it a federal crime for the government to spend money it does not have. Non-essential workers are immediately sent home. But for agencies tasked with protecting human life and national security, like the TSA, the Border Patrol, and the Coast Guard, the law classifies them as excepted. This means they are legally mandated to continue reporting for duty. If they refuse to show up, they face immediate termination. Furthermore, under federal law, it is illegal for government employees to strike. They are effectively trapped by their own oath. The only lifeline they have is a piece of legislation passed in 2019 called the Government Employee Fair Treatment Act, which guarantees that whenever the shutdown finally ends, they will receive full retroactive back pay. But a promise of future money does not buy groceries today. By the end of the week, the GOP remained entirely paralyzed in the Senate, repeatedly failing to secure the 60-vote threshold required to break the deadlock. Because the stalemate holds, the shutdown has now extended indefinitely into the weekend. The men and women tasked with protecting the homeland are forced to sell their blood plasma to make rent, while neither side in Washington is willing to blink. Do you know anyone affected by the current shutdown? Describe their situation in the comments below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.